Remember when buying from Sears felt safe? When you didn't compare reviews because you didn't need to? When the catalogue on your kitchen table wasn't just shopping, it was a promise. For more than a century, Sears wasn't just a store. It was where America bought its first tools, its first appliances, its first suits, its first dreams of a better home. If Sears sold it, you trusted it. From small towns to big cities, Sears was part of the American routine, as familiar as Sunday dinner or the evening news. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The company that once stood for quality, service, and loyalty began to forget why people loved it. Decisions made far from the sales floor started to hollow it out from the inside. And slowly, the most trusted store in America stopped feeling like Sears. It began with a simple idea and a catalogue that promised to bring the world to your doorstep. If you were born before 1970, you know what Sears meant, not what it sold. It meant your father announcing on a Saturday morning that he was going to Sears, and you rushing to jump in the car because you knew something important was about to happen. A new tool, a new appliance, something that would last. It meant putting on your good clothes to go there, because a trip to the big Sears store in the city wasn't just shopping, it was an event. It was how families entertained themselves before the internet, before mobile phones, before anyone imagined a world where you could buy anything with a tap of your finger. It meant the catalogue arriving in the mail and becoming part of the household, thick as a phone book, heavy in your hands, full of everything you could imagine and things you couldn't. Kids spent hours circling items before Christmas. Parents made lists for birthdays. Farmers in remote areas found equipment they couldn't get anywhere else. And for a generation of young boys, that catalogue had a few pages they flipped to a little too quickly. Everybody knew. Nobody said it out loud. That was the kind of quiet, ordinary America Sears lived inside. Sears was woven into the fabric of ordinary life in ways that are almost impossible to explain to someone who wasn't there. A man who grew up in the 1960s remembered the time his father sent him to another part of the store while they were shopping. He thought it was strange at the time. He didn't understand. His father was buying him his first Craftsman toolbox and tool set as a combined birthday and Christmas present. That man kept those tools for decades. It was family. It was America itself. So when you hear that Sears is gone now, reduced to a handful of stores that barely function, the natural question isn't what went wrong with the business. The natural question is, how does something that important just disappear? How does a company that built the tallest building in the world, that employed more Americans than almost any other company, that was once called the Amazon of its time, how does it just fade away? The answer isn't simple. It's not about one bad decision or one greedy executive. It's about decades of small choices, each one pulling the company a little further from what made it special. It's about forgetting what the customers actually cared about. It's about believing that success was permanent instead of earned every single day. This is the story of that slow unraveling, of the trust that was built over generations and lost in less than one, of the workers who tried to hold things together, and of what America lost when the most reliable name in retail became just another empty storefront in a dying mall. The story of Sears begins with a railroad agent and a box of watches that nobody wanted. In 1886, in the small town of North Redwood, Minnesota, a young man named Richard Sears worked at a train station. One day, a shipment of gold watches arrived. The intended recipient refused them. Most people would have sent them back. Richard Sears saw opportunity. He bought the watches himself for $12 each. Then he sold them to other railroad agents for $14. $2 profit per watch. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark an idea. Within a year, Sears had quit his railroad job and started a mail-order watch business in Minneapolis. He needed someone who actually knew how to repair watches, so he hired a watchmaker named Alva Roebuck. Sears, Roebuck and Company was born, but watches were just the beginning. In 1896, something happened that would change everything. the United States government introduced rural free delivery. Suddenly, the Postal Service would bring packages directly to farms and small towns across the country. Richard Sears understood immediately what this meant. America was full of people who lived miles from the nearest general store, people who couldn't easily travel to cities, people who needed things but had no way to get them. The Sears catalog would bring the store to them. What started as a simple pamphlet selling watches and jewelry grew into something extraordinary. By the early 1900s, the Sears catalog was hundreds of pages long. It sold everything: sewing machines, bicycles, musical instruments, clothing, farm equipment, medicine, toys, and houses. Between 1908 and 1940, Sears sold over 70,000 complete homes through the catalog. They shipped all the materials and instructions, and families built them themselves. Some of those houses are still standing today, a century later. The catalog became known as the Wish Book, and in rural America, it was more than a shopping tool. It was a window to the world. Families would gather around it, turning pages, dreaming about what they might someday own. It was entertainment. It was education. It was hope, printed on paper and delivered to your mailbox. Sears didn't just sell products. It sold the idea that no matter where you lived, no matter how far from the city, you could have access to the same quality goods as everyone else. That was revolutionary, and it built trust that would last for generations. As America changed, Sears changed with it. By the 1920s, more people were moving to cities and suburbs. The automobile was becoming common. Suddenly, customers could travel to stores instead of waiting for packages. In 1925, Sears made a bold decision. They opened their first retail store on the west side of Chicago. It was an immediate success. The genius was in the location. Sears didn't build downtown, where rent was expensive and parking was scarce. They built at the crossroads outside of cities, near the new highways, where the growing suburbs would soon arrive. They weren't just following customers, they were waiting for them. Over the next few decades, Sears stores multiplied across America. By the 1950s, they were everywhere, and walking into one was an experience that people remember to this day. The smell of fresh popcorn near the entrance, the scent of rubber and motor oil drifting from the automotive section, kids tugging at their parents' sleeves, pointing at the toy displays, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the satisfying ding of cash registers, friendly salespeople who actually knew the products they were selling. Sears wasn't cheap. There were always less expensive options at other stores, but people paid the premium gladly because they knew a product from Sears would last. A jumper from Sears might outlast 3 from anywhere else. A refrigerator would run for 20 years. The quality was the deal, and Sears kept its word. By the mid-1960s, Sears was one of the biggest retailers in America, one of the biggest employers. A company so large it felt permanent. In 1973, they opened a headquarters in Chicago that became the tallest building in the world, the Sears Tower. 110 stories of corporate confidence rising above the city like an exclamation point. For a brief, shining moment, Sears seemed invincible. But heights like that can make you forget how far there is to fall. What made Sears special wasn't just the products, it was the brands. Craftsman, Kenmore, DieHard. These weren't just labels, they were promises. Craftsman tools were a rite of passage. Fathers passed down their Craftsman toolboxes to their sons, knowing the lifetime guarantee meant those tools would outlast them both. If a wrench broke, you brought it back. They replaced it. No questions asked. No receipts required. Just a handshake and a new tool. A man from the Philippines, whose grandfather worked in America in the 1980s and 90s, still has the Craftsman tools his grandfather brought home decades ago. He uses them every day as a mechanic. He never set foot in a Sears store, but he understood what those tools meant because his grandfather told him stories. Kenmore appliances were the backbone of the American household. washers that could handle a Little League team's uniforms week after week, refrigerators that kept running through administrations and anniversaries and graduations. Families trusted Kenmore the way they trusted gravity. It was just there, working, reliable, never demanding attention. And DieHard batteries. The name said everything. These batteries started cars in the deepest cold of Minnesota winters and the brutal heat of Arizona summers. If someone told you their car had a DieHard, you knew that car would start. No doubt, no hesitation. These brands weren't built through advertising. They were built through experience, through millions of small moments where a product did exactly what it was supposed to do, through the quiet satisfaction of opening a toolbox that your father gave you and knowing it would serve your children someday. Sears stood behind what it sold. If something broke, they fixed it. If you weren't satisfied, they made it right. The customer service counter wasn't a place where you argued. It was a place where problems got solved. This created a relationship between Sears and its customers that went deeper than retail. It was trust. The same kind of trust you have in a neighbor who always returns what he borrows, always helps when you need it, always does what he says he'll do. That trust took decades to build, and it would prove frighteningly easy to destroy. For workers, Sears wasn't just a job, it was a career. The company offered benefits that were almost unheard of at the time. Profit sharing, generous pensions. The sense that if you gave your working life to Sears, Sears would take care of you. A man in Kansas City worked at the busiest Sears automotive center in the region from 1974 to 1978. They sold excellent tires, batteries, shocks, and exhaust systems. The managers were sharp and fair. The salesmen made good money. The equipment was top-notch. The main store anchored a major mall and was always immaculate. They paid time and a half on Sundays. When he graduated college and went to work for Allstate Insurance, they credited him 4.5 years for his time at Sears because Sears owned Allstate. His time had counted. His loyalty had been recognized. He has nothing bad to say about those years. It pains him to know the company is gone. Another man came to America in 1975 as a refugee from Vietnam. He walked into a Sears store, speaking broken English, and asked for a job. They handed him a broom. He worked his way up. Eventually, he became a technician, driving one of those Sears repair vans to people's homes, fixing televisions and electronics. He retired from Sears after more than 45 years. His entire family's life in America was built on that first job, that first chance, that broom. These stories weren't unusual. They were Sears. Generations of Americans found their footing there, found dignity, found a path to something better. The stores weren't just places to shop. They were places where people built lives. The changes didn't happen all at once. They crept in slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a slow leak you don't notice until the damage is done. In the 1970s, new competitors started appearing. Walmart, Kmart, Target. These discount stores were different from Sears. They were leaner, hungrier, focused on low prices rather than lasting quality. At first, Sears didn't seem worried. After all, they were the kings of retail. They had decades of success behind them. These newcomers were selling cheap goods to budget shoppers. Sears sold quality to families who understood value. But the new stores were appearing everywhere, in suburban areas and small towns, in places where Sears had once been the only option, and their prices were hard to ignore. Sears responded, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of strengthening their stores, instead of doubling down on what made them special, they started diversifying, buying other companies, selling other companies, getting into credit cards and real estate and insurance. In the 1980s, Sears owned Allstate Insurance. They owned Coldwell Banker, the country's largest real estate brokerage. They started the Discover credit card. They were becoming a conglomerate, a collection of businesses that had less and less to do with what customers actually walked into Sears stores to buy. The focus shifted. The stores themselves started to feel different. Long-time customers noticed. The salespeople seemed less knowledgeable. The selection felt thinner. The lighting seemed dimmer. That feeling of walking into a place where everything was cared for, where someone took pride in every display, began to fade. It was subtle. You couldn't point to one thing that was wrong. You just knew that something had changed. By 1990, Walmart had overtaken Sears as America's largest retailer. The company that had built the world's tallest building was no longer number one. But even then, Sears still had something the discount stores didn't. Those brands. Craftsman, Kenmore, DieHard, the repair services, the warranties, the trust. If they had focused on those strengths, if they had remembered why people loved them, the story might have ended differently. But they didn't. The 1990s brought a decision that still baffles people who remember what Sears once was. In 1993, Sears discontinued its catalogue, the wish book, the thing that had started it all, the connection to rural America, the window to the world that had defined the company for nearly a century. Gone. The reasoning made sense on paper. Catalogue sales had been declining. The operation was expensive. It was time to focus on the retail stores. But here's what nobody seemed to realize. That catalogue wasn't just a sales channel. It was a distribution network, a customer database, a connection to millions of American households that had trusted Sears for generations. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Because just 1 year later, a man named Jeff Bezos founded a little company called Amazon. Amazon essentially took the Sears catalog model and brought it into the digital age. Online ordering, massive selection, delivery to your doorstep. Everything Sears had pioneered a century earlier, reimagined for the internet. Sears had the infrastructure, the customer base, the brand recognition, the warehouse networks, the experience with mail order that stretched back to 1896. They could have been Amazon before Amazon existed. Instead, they handed that opportunity away. By the time Sears finally launched a real website years later, it was too late. The site was clunky and unreliable. The company that had once defined convenience was now a decade behind. It wasn't just a missed opportunity. It was a failure of imagination. A failure to understand that the world was changing and that the skills Sears had built over a century were exactly what the new world needed. But by then, the people making decisions at Sears seemed disconnected from what the company actually was, from what it meant to customers, from why it mattered. They were managing a business. They had forgotten they were serving a country. In 2005, Sears merged with Kmart. On paper, it looked like a lifeline. Two struggling retail giants combining forces to take on Walmart. Together, they would be stronger. Together, they would survive. In reality, it was like tying two sinking ships together and hoping they would somehow float. Kmart had just emerged from bankruptcy 3 years earlier. Sears was watching its relevance slip away. Neither company had solved its fundamental problems. Combining them didn't fix anything. It just created a bigger company with twice the problems. A hedge fund manager named Eddie Lampert engineered the merger. He became the chairman and eventually the chief executive of the combined company. Lampert was a Wall Street success story. He had made fortunes through smart investments. But running a retail operation serving millions of American families was different from managing a portfolio. Instead of investing in stores, in employees, in the customer experience, the new leadership focused on cost-cutting, selling assets, reducing staff, closing locations. The stores began to look shabby. Shelves sat half empty. The lights seemed dimmer. The employees, stretched thin and poorly supported, couldn't provide the service that Sears had once been famous for. Customers noticed. They walked in expecting the Sears they remembered. What they found was something else entirely. Long waits at checkout, understaffed departments, poor selection, prices that no longer seemed justified by the quality. The feeling that nobody was really in charge anymore. It wasn't that customers abandoned Sears, it was that Sears stopped being Sears. You can't betray trust like that without consequences. People didn't leave angry. They just stopped coming. They found other places to buy their tools, their appliances, their clothes. They moved on. And every year, there were fewer reasons to come back. One by one, the things that had made Sears special started disappearing. In 2017, Craftsman tools were sold to Stanley Black & Decker. The brand that fathers had passed to sons for generations now belonged to someone else. Kenmore and DieHard were shopped around, offered for sale to anyone willing to buy. The crown jewels of American retail, the brands that had meant something to millions of families, treated like assets to be liquidated. The Sears Tower had already been sold years earlier. It was renamed. The company that built the tallest structure in the world no longer had its name on the skyline, and the stores kept closing by the hundreds. In town after town, the Sears that had anchored the local mall went dark. The parking lots that had once been full on weekends sat empty. The fluorescent lights that had hummed for decades were turned off for the last time. For many communities, losing Sears was about more than losing a store. Sears had been the anchor that drew people to the mall. When it closed, other businesses followed. The foot traffic disappeared. The whole shopping center started to die. Towns that had grown up around those malls found themselves with empty storefronts and quiet weekends. The gathering place was gone, and nothing rose to replace it. In October 2018, Sears Holdings filed for bankruptcy, a company that had survived for over a century. That had defined American retail. That had been woven into the lives of generations. Bankrupt. The news wasn't really a surprise by then. Everyone could see it coming, but it still felt like a death in the family, like losing something you'd always assumed would be there. The stores that remained limped on for a while, a few dozen here, a few dozen there, shadows of what they once were. Walking into one felt like visiting a patient in hospice. The shelves were sparse. The employees looked defeated. The promise that had once hung in the air was gone. Today, just a handful of Sears stores remain open, barely functioning, waiting for the end. The company that was once called the Amazon of its time, that employed more Americans than almost any other business, that built homes and sold dreams and kept its promises for 100 years, reduced to a footnote. The collapse of Sears wasn't just a business failure. It was a cultural loss. Think about what disappeared. The wish book that sparked childhood dreams. The tools that fathers passed to sons. The appliances that anchored American kitchens for generations. The stores where you put on your good clothes because shopping there meant something. The workers who spent their careers there, who found dignity and purpose and a path to a better life. The repair technicians who drove those vans to people's homes and fix things instead of telling you to throw them away. The idea that a company could stand behind what it sold, that if something broke, someone would make it right. That trust between a business and its customers could be a sacred thing. All of it gone. And in its place, what do we have? Disposable products that last a few years instead of a few decades. Customer service numbers that keep you on hold for hours. Warranties that aren't worth the paper they're printed on. The sense that nobody really stands behind anything anymore. Maybe that was inevitable. Maybe the world was always going to change this way. Maybe the kind of trust that Sears represented belongs to another era, one that couldn't survive the pressure of global competition and quarterly earnings reports. But it's worth remembering what we lost. Worth honoring what Sears meant to the people who worked there and shopped there and built their lives around it. A woman still has the Kenmore range she bought from Sears in 2003. She jokes that it lasted longer than her marriage did. But there's something bittersweet in that joke. Something about reliability and permanence that we don't seem to value anymore. Somewhere in a garage right now, there's a Craftsman toolbox that a grandfather bought 50 years ago. The tools inside still work perfectly. The lifetime guarantee still means something, even if the company that made it barely exists. And somewhere in a charity shop, there's probably a piece of clothing with a Sears label from 1975. Still in perfect condition after 5 decades. A reminder of quality we'll never see again. The lesson of Sears isn't really about retail strategy or corporate management. It's about something simpler and sadder. Trust takes generations to build. It can be destroyed in a decade. If you forget why people love you, they'll eventually stop. And when something precious is gone, when it's finally truly gone, all that's left are the memories. The smell of popcorn near the entrance. The weight of the catalogue in your hands. The satisfaction of a tool that did exactly what it was supposed to do. The feeling of walking into a store and knowing you were in good hands. That feeling is hard to find now. The places that offered it are mostly gone. But if you were there, if you remember what Sears was in its best years, you carry something with you that the next generation will never quite understand. You know what a promise felt like, when a company made one and actually kept it. And you know what America lost when the most trusted store in the country finally closed its doors. If you have memories of Sears, share them below. The catalogue, the tools, the store your family went to on special occasions. These stories matter. They connect us to something that's slipping away. They remind us of a time when things were built to last. And they deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to help us keep improving. If you'd like to help us to improve, you can become our first member or support it through Super Thanks. I truly appreciate it. Thanks.